This is the fourth session of my tutorial on trapping wild pigs. The last session covered unframed panels for corral trap construction. This session will focus on framed panels. The information provided will be based on my experience. I'm not sponsored or paid by any business associated with trapping of wild pigs. Framed panels are typically made with unframed commercial cattle, utility, or horse panels. Frames are typically made with square steel tubing welded to sections of unframed panels. The primary purpose of framing panels is to reduce the time required to install and remove corral trap walls. Framed panels are ideal for traps that are frequently moved. They're best for taking the trap to the pigs for increased productivity rather than waiting for the pigs to come to the trap. Panels are linked together with vertical pins. Erection and disassembly of traps is much faster than unframed panels and can be completed by one person. Square steel tubing, usually an inch or an inch and a quarter inch squares, is used to make the framed panels. The tubing is typically 14 gauge and welded into the form of a rectangle. The size of the rectangle can be 5 to 6 feet tall and 6'8", 8 foot, or 10 foot long. The unframed panels used for this are commercial cattle, utility, and horse panels, or they may be combined together, for example, using part of a horse panel and a cattle panel to make a hybrid panel. The same guidelines for use as described in section 4 should be considered when deciding which kind of a panel or commercial panel to use. These commercial panels are welded to the frame. Then the frames are hooked together with a pin and sleeve arrangement. The sleeves are offset and welded to the ends. The sleeves may be square tubing or round rod, and the length is not very critical. 3 to 6 inches is fine. Steel pins or rods are slid through the sleeves to hold the panels together. There are 3 convenient frame length options. You can take a 20-foot long commercial panel and cut it in thirds, so you'll have 3 pieces, 6 foot, 8 inches. You could cut a 16-foot panel in half so that you have 2 8-foot pieces, or you could cut a 20-foot panel in half so that you have 2 10-foot pieces. For my taste, 10 feet is too long. I prefer 6'8" or 8 foot. There are some ways that you can use panels that you already have, or what's convenient, or what's on sale, to achieve a overall height of 6 foot for the framed panel. You can start off with a commercial panel that's 6 feet high. That's the easiest, of course. Or you could, if you ended up with 5-foot commercial panels, you can still make the frame 6 foot high and then put an additional cross member at 5 feet. Another option is to use 4-foot tall commercial panels and add 2 or 3 additional cross members. So you'll end up with a 6-foot total height, and you'll prevent the pigs from crawling through, and probably from jumping over. I prefer to have 3 sleeves per joint and 2 joints per panel connection. And I have tried a couple of different ways of doing this, but my preference is to have 2 pieces of 1-inch square tubing per sleeve. It gives some flexibility. It allows you to use either the inside sleeve or the outside sleeve when you're on uneven ground. You can use 1x2 rectangular tubing to in the same way, but it makes the joints a little bit sloppy, I guess is a good way to say it. When you make the frames, you're typically going to have some tubing left over, and you can use this tubing to make the sleeves. I've also used 1¼ inch square tubing to make the sleeves, and I like it better because it gives you more options when you choose the rod size. I prefer heavier rods, and the 1¼ inch square tubing allows you to use heavier rods. Even if you're making the frames out of 1 inch, you can use 1¼ square tubing for the sleeves. The pins are often made with hot rolled steel rod. There's hot rolled and cold rolled. The hot rolled is the cheapest, but it's the dimensional tolerances are not as close on hot rolled, but it doesn't matter for this purpose. You can use long pins or short pins. The short pins cost less because you use less material. They're easier to install. They're also easier to lose because of their size, and they are twice as much work to form or weld on a cap, which is essential. To make long pins, what I would do is take a 20-foot rod or pipe, not a pipe, a rod, and cut it into 3 equal parts, which would be 6 foot 8 inches long, and then either weld a cap on them or bend them over at the top, so that the overall length, the effective length, is still more than 6 feet. A 1/2 inch diameter is the minimum that I would recommend. I think 5/8 is better, and you may even want to go bigger than that. It's possible to use other kinds of steel frames for making framed panels. Many years ago, I was giving some residential fence panels that had been taken down for whatever purpose, I don't know, but they'd just been cut with a torch, and they were different lengths. They were made out of horizontal square tubing that was like inch and 1/4, 1.5 inches, I don't remember. And then there were vertical square steel tubing pieces to form basically the grid that was excluding animals or people or whatever. And they were maybe 3/4 of an inch. I originally made these into panels for goats, as I remember. What I did is I made them all the same length. I had to buy some material and add it on, and then I put whatever panels I had, which I think were horse panels at the time, I put them on as a grid. Later, after using those with goats, I used them for dogs, and then finally I used them for pig trapping. They were only like 5 feet high, but as far as I know, there's never been any pigs jump out of them. They're very heavy and very strong, stronger by far than the panels I've been describing. They worked, and I think they were economical because the material was given to me. So that's one option. If you happen to have any of that residential fencing, you could use that. Another possibility is to use portable corral panels. A friend of mine inherited a property that had many of these in place. Of course, they're somewhat rusted, but they could be used to make pig traps. I would consider, because of their shape, I would consider installing them upside down so they have a solid bar at the bottom. However, you could weld a solid bar to the bottom and then put panels over those. They're typically 5 feet high. You could make them higher if you wanted to. So these are two possibilities that frames that you could use that do not require buying and welding square tubing to make a frame. Framed panels have some significant advantages over unframed panels. They're much faster to assemble and disassemble. There's no T-post to drive in the ground and pull out when you're ready to move them. No wire ties to install and remove. And they're easier to handle because they're rigid and shorter than unframed panels. They are stronger than unframed panels. They have significantly more steel in them. They're much easier to install on hard or rocky ground. There is a possibility of catching more pigs if you take the trap to the pigs instead of waiting for the pigs to come to the trap. Compared to unframed panels, the frame panels are easier to transport. You can do it on a short flatbed trailer, whereas the unframed panels require a 16-foot flatbed. These could be 8 feet long. You can even carry them on the bed of a pickup truck. I've seen stock trailers modified for carrying panels, the frame panels on their sides. This allows you to carry pigs in the stock trailer itself and the trap panels on the outside. Framed panels do have some disadvantages compared to unframed panels. They have a higher initial cost. If you're a person that wants to do it yourself, you're going to have to either do the welding yourself or get someone to do the welding because there's significant welding required. Welded or framed panels do have a slightly larger transport and storage volume, which may be a consideration. This concludes the 4th session of my tutorial on trapping wild pigs. In conclusion, I believe that when installed and made with identical grid types, corral traps made with either framed or unframed panels are just about equally effective. Frame panels cost more initially, but feature a long-term labor savings. The payback depends on how often the trap is relocated and how labor is valued. The next tutorial session will focus on trap gates.